دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء. قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين، فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء.
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم، ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to Finding Me on the ITV networks. This is the month of August and it's Women's Month, and I think it's appropriate that we should end the month with perhaps one of the most dynamic women in our community. As Indian women, we are very proud to have women of such caliber. These are legacies. These are women who have set for us a precedent that tells us and inspires us to a direction that can certainly be a very positive one, but also a very dynamic one. And so with that, I'd like to introduce my very special guest today, and it's Farida Mohamad. Farida, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and thank you very much for making this time.
Thank you very much for having me. Wa alaikum salam.
You know, it's absolutely wonderful to have you here, because I always think about the kind of knowledge that we are losing when we don't capture and sit and talk to people like yourself. The older people that have also been in the community, so many voices have been lost. You know, they fall into the margins, they disappear into the silences of their own homes, and then you don't realize what you really have. And we have pearls and jewels in our community, and I think it's fitting for August, for Women's Month, to have you here sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm actually honored to be here, and I'm honored to talk to you. And I hope we're going to have a wonderful discussion together, yes.
And I want to start with your life. I mean, your real journey begins, I see, from 1986 onwards, you know, when you started traveling almost to all the different spheres of the globe. You attended very many conferences, you participated in very many symposiums, etc., but always raising very pertinent issues. I look through the kind of work that you've done, the history that you carry with you, and I see that your focus was always on women, your focus was on Islam, your focus was on good governance, on democracy. These are wonderful values and ideals, and I mean, it started at the height of apartheid. So how did you get into it, and what drove you in this direction?
I think before I start speaking about myself, I must actually thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all His bounties and His ni'mat that He's given us. I don't think I should have been where I am if it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I also must say that life has been a journey for me, a beautiful journey, which is actually a journey which I devoted to serving my people. And I always maintained that I should be serving with patience, perseverance. That's my mantra. Patience, perseverance, persistence, and precision. And yes, I always believed in justice, and justice for women. When we talk about women's rights, I always believe that it is human rights. It's because women are human beings.
Yeah, we're part of that category.
That's true. And we need to serve our people as human beings. In the Quran, it says itself that we are instructed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to exploit our full potential. And I believe that in my own humility, I had just did what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, to exploit your own potential. I remember when I got married at the age of 18. And when I was married, during the, our society is severely patriarchal. I did try to say that I want to become an optician one day. And somehow I went to Douanefontaine at that time, and I was accepted. And I could not pursue that route because I was married, and I had to go out of the house to study and so forth. So I didn't. I got married, and then I had my first baby, which I adopted after 6 years. And then I started studying, and I started studying with the view that I want to understand the Quran. That was all for Islam. I didn't have the faintest idea that I would become a lecturer and a politician and so forth. I just thought I want to study the Quran and I want to become very good at it. And I studied Arabic, and then I was offered a job at the school. And I started teaching Arabic at school. All these jobs just came through the rahmat of Allah. And
so the doors just opened when your intention is clear.
My doors just opened. And then I started studying at UNISA, which I got distinctions for all the time. And with all Allah's rahmat, I believe. It was nothing to do with what I know or do. And then I had a meeting with the head of department, and I actually talked to him about the course on Hebrew. I said, sir, why do you have Hebrew as a course? I would like to see Islamic studies as a course. I was in my 3rd year at that time. And he says, we had a full 3-hour discussion, a marathon discussion, to say that we need Islamic studies.
So at that time there was no Islamic studies?
No, there was only Hebrew. And then I actually burned the midnight oil, and we put the syllabus together in my own house with a few members of the community. I remember Aziz Sheikh was part of it. And then we had Islamic studies, which is now enjoying a doctoral position at the university. Then I taught 11 years at the university, and then I was 15 to 16 years in parliament. So I believe that it all came from the rahmat of Allah, but I do believe that I have to still do more. I still want to serve.
So I want to know that once you got into UNISA and you opened these doors, you know, that perhaps that fortitude of yours, that perseverance that pushed you to make space for Islamic studies, you know, in the department. How then did you gradually introduce, for instance, Arabic? There was no Arabic, etc. at that point?
No. It was Arabic, it was Department of Semitics. Okay. But Arabic was there, and then the Islamic study, you know, there was a course that is now Arabic, literature, and then Hebrew was part of one of the subjects, and then one of the courses. And then we said, why do we need Hebrew? And then we came up with Islamic studies.
Okay, so they introduced that component.
Yes, and that component came in as part of the actual degree.
Okay.
You know, so it was very good. And I believe that UNISA is doing well with all the distance learning.
Have there been challenges?
Yes.
I mean, you started lecturing at a time when I think the space was very confined for women, because in the academics it was mostly white male professors, or in, for example, in the previously black universities you would have, but mostly male again. Women always occupied a secondary position, and in most instances they served as administrative positions. Yes. And now you were there as a full-time lecturer.
Yes, actually I was the first Muslim woman in that department at that time. I'll tell you how I got the job. I was talking to Professor Dreyer, and we were talking about this subject, Islamic studies, and then he tells me, can you come in, would you like to teach? I said, why not? Of course, I would like to. And then he says, okay, come and see me tomorrow morning. And I was actually employed on that basis because I had such good grades. But that is also from the rahmat of Allah. But the challenges, I must say that yes, it was during the apartheid era. And we had all white professors and very few Indians and blacks. And we had difficulties in terms of assimilation, in terms of, although they were kind to us in the sense that there was not severe hostility, but there was undercurrents. And those undercurrents, one had to persevere and continue, you know. And then later in life, I must say that there was a lot of discrimination in the sense that I was employed as a temporary full-time. And I was employed in temporary full-time, and I was supposed to be teaching only.
That's oxymoron on its own. How do you be temporary full-time?
Now listen to this. A temporary full-time for 11 years. And when I walked out of that office, when I went to Parliament, I walked out without a cent. You know? And we were starting to, when we were earning meager salaries because we were blacks.
Yeah.
Okay? And then, there was no segregation in the canteens at that time because we could go and have a cup of tea and so forth. But there was this white-black thing. You know, it was the segregation was subtle, but it was there. However, my main concern was to teach. And as I said, it was all to do with pleasing my Lord. So for me, it was just to teach people and make sure that I deliver the message.
Okay, so part of your journey at UNISA was a very interesting doctorate or thesis that you wrote, master's. Can you tell us what it was about?
I wrote my master's thesis on polygamy, major exegetical themes. And the thesis actually looked at whether one could or could not be polygamous. But obvious answer is one can be polygamous in Islam, but with a strict adl, justice. And I had a lot of interviews. I did a lot of interviews in the Muslim community. And I had some very negative responses and some very positive responses. But I actually studied Zamakhshari, Qurtubi, Suyuti, Ibn Kathir, Mohamad Abdu, And yeah, I studied all those scholars in terms of the actual polygamous message that I wanted to give. And in the end, I actually said that there was a lot of antagonism, towards polygamy in our society, because I think it's not practiced correctly.
Yeah, I think there's an abuse of the practice.
There's so much abuse, and that's where we have to change things, in terms of how we conduct ourselves.
Yet the foundation of setting forth this precedent of polygamy in Islam was actually to bring about justice and to raise and elevate the status of the woman.
That's right. And I think it's directly opposite to what the community is doing and what people are doing. And I think they do it for their own lustful feelings. And somehow one needs to look at the broader picture of why polygamy came down. I think the verses came down during the Battle of Uhud, when there was lots of widows and orphans. So there's the main idea is about justice.
Yes.
Justice. If you cannot practice justice, marry only one.
Yes.
Monogamy is the rule, and polygamy is a remedial measure.
Yeah, it's the exception.
It's a remedial measure. It's an exception. So
And I think that's a very important part that's often missed in terms of this understanding, even from those where the male or female who put forward this argument for polygamy don't realize that it is allowed in Islam, but it's not the norm, it's the exception.
Absolutely.
We have to go to a break. When we come back, I want to now move this discussion more towards your life than in the political realm. So we'll see you after the break.
بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا في مولده النغم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the second segment today on the ITV networks with a very special guest. I think a wisdom and a legacy in our community with Farida Mohamad. Farida, before we went into the break, we spoke about your journey into education, learning, and of course your contribution in terms of the Islamic sphere. But you've also made a phenomenal contribution in terms of your ethnic identity, and that is being an Indian woman, the first Indian woman to break ground, for instance, in terms of UNISA and bringing forth the Islamic Studies program, lecturing as the first Indian woman also in that department, and then getting into politics and to being a member of parliament. All of these legacies are important because in many ways, although Indians have contributed, there is a very negative narrative about Indians in South Africa as well, the most recent being the kind of discussion that was evoked through the comments made by Julius Malema. And then we see again recently, just now, a few days ago, very negative comments by Indian women about domestic workers on Facebook, a realization that they're still in a very infantile manner of thinking, that they're still encapsulated in this apartheid mentality, not realizing the humanity of those whom they live with. In many ways, I feel that we live maybe side by side with the black people, but we never live together. We have not understood their humanity, nor are we willing to reach out to get that understanding. Now, as being, a politician, you were forced to work amongst mostly black people. You were forced to challenge the status quo, to challenge injustice, oppression. How was it from within yourself that you also had to, so within your own self, your own community, with all your own Indians in parliament, dealing with it on the one hand, and then of course with the broader context, there must have been very many challenges. What were your experiences?
Yeah, I think as a politician, I had a tremendous opportunity to actually go into the bigger arena. I always was in the social, I was always in the NGO sector, NGOs and CBO sector. As a little girl, I remember I used to go to the black areas and the colored areas to go and help and go and assist and try to see what they need and how to teach and whatnot. In those days, as a little girl, we went. I was at 7 and 8, and I used to go get into the car with my brother. We used to go, at that time it was MYM and
Yes.
ICSA and all those organizations. And my brother was part of the MYM, and I used to always go with them. And for me, there was no color issue as a little girl, because in my father's home, the black people, I consider myself black,
Yes.
used to come and eat with us.
Oh.
And the white people used to come and eat with us. We had no color distinction in our homes. But yes, I agree with you that there's, in the Indian community, I think we are still very immature in the political arena. Our maturity needs to be, we need to become more mature in terms of how we see humanity as a whole, you know. And then from the CBO sector, which is a small sector, I went into the big political arena where I worked with hundreds and thousands of people. I remember going to Shoshanguve and addressing 500 people in a hall to say that, yes, we need justice. We need to live the Bill of Rights. I know the ANC Bill of Rights is one of the best Bill of Rights, and our constitution is one of the best constitutions. We are the oldest organization. ANC is the oldest organization. I understand that at the moment we are going through a trying time, but I don't believe that ANC can compromise in its belief of justice and equality in the world. I think we've made a tremendous mark in the world. I look at the moment, I do believe that there are difficulties.
Yes, of course.
On the front of the ANC. But from my experience, I think it was a big learning curve to be in parliament. As a woman, Muslim woman, yes, we had many challenges. I didn't have a wife to cook for me at home. I had to be the politician. I had to leave my house at 4 in the morning or 3 in the morning to be at a meeting at 8 o'clock. I had to be listening to people in our very severely patriarchal society that, oh, you've left your husband and you've gone to work. And yet I was serving the people. I was serving the nation. And our society could not accept that fact. So we do have immaturity in that sense. And then we had the difficulty of sexism in terms of women and men. I do believe that there's a lot of discrimination still. In all arenas.
And you felt this in the mosque as well?
Yes. I mean, in terms of just deviating a bit from the political arena, I remember a time when we were working for the rights of women. What Islam gives us rights 1400 years ago. And I was in the mosque and I was in front and I said, women should come to mosque. In the Prophet's time, Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's time, women were going to mosque.
Of course.
And during the 70s.
And he never forbade them.
Yeah, during the 70s, we were not allowed in the mosque. There was no provision for, in some of the mosques, there were no provision. Okay, very few mosques allowed women. But I remember one man from back wanted to come and say, you know, who are you? And really he was violent. Luckily, we had people that said, no, what she's saying is right. Because, and now, alhamdulillah, after 20 years or so, we are freely going to mosque. But we had a struggle in the 1970s. Where
to get that space,
yes, we were fighting for that space.
Yeah, but I think the mentalities at that time, also the 1970s, and much of it has still permeated into the 2017, if I may say so. There are remnants of that still. That mentality was still the very patriarchal Indo-Pak mentality, not the Islamic mentality. I think men in our communities, for instance, found it difficult to divorce themselves from those cultures that they came with or inherited, as opposed to what Islam actually taught. And that is in many ways what is still manifesting in our communities, because you carry a culture, you carry an indoctrination, for example, apartheid, and then you have difficulty reconciling that particular indoctrination and that socialization with what Islam teaches, and Islam teaches you justice. And that's why we find this racism still in the Indian community. We find the sexism, we find the patriarchy. These are shackles that need to you know, that we as the Muslim community need to let go. So when you were in Parliament, you did a lot of speeches about addressing women's issues.
Yes, actually my forte there was actually improving the status of women, trade and industry. I felt I should be in trade and industry because there's always this discrimination for women.
Yes.
And then foreign affairs, and then later I did science and technology and tourism in those committees. You know, when we were in our, when we just came into Parliament, I went 2 years later, but I worked with Comrade Mandela, which was a privilege and an honor to be with a person like him in our midst. You know, when I used to sit in the caucus and I used to be with him, I used to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I'm with such an honorable person. And I hope I can emulate the values, his values, and the values of you know, Islam and the Quran. And I was always praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, oh Allah, keep me grounded in Islam, in the principles of Islam, and keep me humble, because you can get lost.
You can, definitely.
You can get lost in the big arena, and you can get into the wrong.
And it's a very vicious arena as well.
It's vicious.
Yes.
That's why I'm saying the move from the NGO sector to the political sector was a tremendous move, because it was a vicious circle here. There it was all booty and, oh no, yes, nice, soft talk, easy going, don't worry, I'll get it done, all that kind of talk, soft talk. But here it is hard politics, where you are really working on issues that are brass tacks, that really affect the people.
And you told me also when we were talking that you were engaged in very many policy decisions and involving policy changing legislation. Was that taxing?
Yes, let me tell you, when we actually came into Parliament, we looked at legislation which was the apartheid legislation, which promoted brutality, promoted oppression, promoted discrimination on the basis of color and sex, which actually was brutal and oppressive laws.
And you had to revive.
And we had to look at every word, every syllable, every comma, and ask ourselves the question, how will it affect the poorest of the poor? So we worked very, very hard on that, on those pieces of legislation. Remember, we are policy makers in Parliament. So we look at legislation and we say, how will it affect the poorest of the poor? How will it affect the women? How will it affect the vulnerable groups, the women and children and the poor? So we always ask those questions at the back of our mind.
And those are very good questions, and we know that without a doubt that they are some of the best policies that we have, but the implementation is a problem.
Yes, the challenges are that these policies need to be implemented. And that's where we lacking, we need to really do that. I remember when I was a part of serving the community on Islamic Muslim marriages, I was part of that. We were only, I think, 1 or 2 women there. And we worked at least 2.5 years or 3 years, I don't remember exactly, and we worked on the Muslim personal law. And that is actually, I have to tell you about 2 cases that were milestones for Muslim women, where the men didn't leave a will behind, and the women actually went to the Constitutional Court, and she got her money because of the law,
yes.
right? She got her share. And then there was another woman who was actually in a polygamous marriage, and she got also her share from the estate.
And it's strange that they have to go to the Constitutional Court, to have to go to another legal body to get a haq that Islam has already given to them, that our families, our communities, our men and our leadership in our Muslim communities do not recognize the need to establish this as a precedent. And we shouldn't be resorting to a Constitutional Court, isn't it?
That's true. But you see, that is why I say we have a lot of work to do still,
yes,
which I feel I want to commit myself to do in terms of serving my people, serving our people, which is our mandate from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
We're running out of time, and there's still so much to catch up with you on, and I want to talk a little bit about your struggle, the liberation heroes, the people that you worked with, and the kind of ideas that were infused through that engagements.
I must tell you that it has been such an honor to be part of being with people that were in the liberation struggle. I was having breakfast one day with one of them, and I was just awestruck by the kind of personalities we have. When you look at the Indians in the liberation struggle, they came in the 17th century, and they came as laborers, and I put a smile on my face when I saw that Indians came in, and when they were given the right to trade, they actually were so good at it that the white shops, the retailers, had to close down. And that's when the white supremacy, the people, got a shock. They said, well, we've got to put a stop to this. Otherwise, we are going to be out of business, because these Indians are so clever. They are so entrepreneurial. So there was quite a bit of vacillation, in terms of the laws. But obviously, you know that there were draconian laws at that time.
Yes.
And we had these liberation fighters like Dr. Dadu, the Asfords, the Kachalias, all those, the Naidus, the Pillays, the Nana Sitas. These were our leaders. When it comes to mind in terms of what they've contributed to the world to actually to South Africa and to the world, because we actually are part of the world.
Yes, of
We're
course.
part of the global society. And I believe that they had made tremendous contributions, and we can only learn from them. And I always believe that we actually can take a cue from them how we should conduct our lives.
We're at the end. I would like you to leave us with a parting comment.
My parting comment is that we still have a lot of work to do. We as women in South Africa have a tremendous amount of work that we need to do with our people, and we must ensure that there's always justice. I think we need to move away from corruption. We must ensure that people in leadership are leading their people in the correct way. And I believe that we have a tremendous amount of talent around us, like yourself and many others that are young talented women that must guide others. And I'm happy to be here.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you for sharing this time with us, and we'll play out with a little video on the struggle of Indians in South Africa. Fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
You were displaced because of race, and when the time came for you to fight, you stood up straight for your rights. From the voices now beyond to the singing still to come, with every beating of the drum. Oh, what we've become.
قسما بالله رب العالمين وارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء.
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم